Tier 1 Counter-Strike has been exciting recently, with many competitive teams ready to take the top spot. With the perfect World Major coming up, we still do not know who can take the title. We have the favorites in Na'Vi, Vitality, Spirit, and G2, but we also cannot forget about FaZe, Liquid, or Mouse, who might just steal the title with the right timing. When I take a step back and look at the top 5 teams now, there are some players whom I never would have heard of 2 or 3 years ago. Names like JL, Emo, Wonderful, Malps, or even Zershan. So I did a bit of research and found a couple of old but recognizable teams that rarely made it into the tier 1 scene, and I get incredibly impressed by how far and fast these players have improved since then. Furthermore, teams that we've rarely been hearing about years ago, even in regions that have made little to no impact, have now been putting up some incredible games against the Tier 1 scene today. This got me to realize that the gap between the Tier 1 competitive scene up onto the Tier 3 scene is maybe not so far apart today compared to what it was, say, back in 2019 or 2020. I found myself a little bit more interested in this topic, so I've dived into the tier 3 scene and plugged a few matches to try and compare what could be the difference between these tier 3 players and teams right now are to the tier 1 teams of today. Before we get started, I want to give a disclaimer that during my research, I found that there are quite a few different definitions of tier 1, 2 or 3 teams, and it gets confusing sometimes. So here is a list of my own definitions of the tiers as a reference point for the video going forward. There are many teams in both the Tier 1 and Tier 3 scenes with very different playstyle and game plans when it comes to tackling a match. Anti-threading also plays a huge role in any game plan that the team makes. In the interest of time, I will go through one Tier 1 team and one Tier 3 team in the map of Mirage, highlighting the key differences that I think can be brought forward to every map and match in the scene, meaning I will not be going through map-specific strategies unless it directly affects the macro or protocols in the team. The Tier 1 team I'll be going through today is none other than Na'Vi, the current number 1 team in the world and are widely known for their tactical approach to the game. They have no star players but a lot of very key fundamentally sound individuals that can hold their own against the Zywus, the Nickels and the Donks. On the other side, the Tier 3 team I want to highlight is Fluffy Gangsters. They are a Russian team that has the roster together for about 6 months with no roster changes as of the time of the recording. They boast a rather average win rate and mostly take part in the Europe CCT qualifiers. The reason why I chose Fluffy Gangsters in this video is that the team has a very clear and coherent style of playing that rarely tries to rely on individual heroics but has something that is just barely holding them back from performing better. This is not to say that the other tier 3 teams are like this, but I do feel that it is easier to bring comparisons to Na'Vi, which can really highlight the differences between the tier 1 and tier 3 scene in general. Diving straight into the pistol round between the teams, I find that the early rounds are usually very similar. That is not really a surprise, as pistol rounds are usually very anti-strat reliant and gambly, because there are not a lot of utilities for counterplay options and usually both sides have to rely on aim duels and protocols. A common tactic on T-side Mirage pistols is an A execute covering stairs and jungle, forcing the CT team to either play retake or force the anchors to fight for their lives, with the T-side players forcing their way through CT spawn to get space to play the post plant. In the Fluffy Gangsters vs the Suspect game at CCT Season 2 Europe Series 14 close qualifier, Fluffy Gangsters on CT starts off with an early deep A setup, with Sobi playing a ticket booth and his teammate John were holding the top of Palace. Yurimyata starts as a jungle player holding any form of mid aggression until his B-shot player Highness reaches in position to control middle. Yurimyata will then rotate to A stairs where their B player Takanashi plays a passive B retake setup. The plan for the A side players is for Sobi to draw the attention of the opposing team while staying in a safe spot, maintaining the pressure of the CT presence so that the T players have to focus on him, while John with the duelist can net himself at least 2 kills to then play for the quick retake or at least get a man advantage. When the A execute sets in, Sobi gets deleted by the A main player, leaving his teammate John alone, transitioning from a generally solid setup to a death trap as he is left alone with multiple angles to cover at once, leading him to die and only getting a single kill. Takanashi, the B-side player, tries to go for a fast rotate and keep the pressure on the T side while John is still alive, but his timing is just too late and he eventually dies without getting anything, leaving his last 2 teammates out with no CT control for the retake, losing them the round. In an earlier game between Space and Fluffy Gangsters, Space performs the same execute on A side with slight variations of their Palace players. Fluffy Gangsters this time plays a 2-2-1 setup having only Sobi on A side ticket booth for what looks like an A retake setup. When the execute comes in, Sobi pushes behind triple box and tries to take an upfront duo alone, ultimately getting a 1-for-1 trade. Highness initially goes for a fast rotation, but falls back to his team where they gather 3 players to try and regain control of ticket booth before committing to the retake. John holds connector and jungle for map control, and there, the round plays out strongly towards Fluffy Gangster's favour. We can see that Fluffy Gangsters understand what is needed to be done to play a retake scenario on A side. They need to have space from CT to ticket booth, jungle and connector to suffocate the T side players playing on site, and they did that. Space felt heavy presence towards CT, so they pushed towards jungle to try and give themselves room, only to be caught by John from connector who had a great timing. It was only from Dennis' insane shots that made the round close at all. When we compare the game to Na'Vi against Eternal Fire in ESL Pro League Season 20, you can see that a similar A execute has been caught by Eternal Fire. On Na'Vi's end, Bit is the solo A player and 3 players from Na'Vi is taking mid. When the A execute comes in, you can see the protocols of the team coming into effect, as this is a really common strategy coming from even the Tier 3 leagues. Na'Vi is already prepared in advance in the case of an A execute. Firstly, I would like to highlight one key difference between Tier 1 and Tier 3 teams is that while the Tier 3 players are extremely sharp, the Tier 1 individuals are confident about their aim. This gives them the leeway to forgo armor and better weaponry in exchange for utilities or timings, as they know they can be just as deadly without armor or even a primary weapon. As I go through the games, I will bring up more instances that will bring up this point. Going back to the round, JL breaks the jungle smoke to apply pressure as Bit tries to pick up the timing. Woxy catches him, but in the meantime, Alexibi pushes forward in CT to take space before getting a flash from Wonderful to fight the ticket booth players. Unfortunately, the Na'Vi players were unable to get any kills, but what they had was map control, essentially forcing the T-side players to fight from side. JL and Ema tried to contain them, but eventually lost their duels, so Alexibi and Wonderful have to claw their way through the side without jungle control, eventually losing the round. Now, there were many things happening at once, but you can see that each piece of utility thrown by both teams has a purpose, all of them leading to getting map control or a kill. The breaking of smoke by JL for Ema and Bit to pick as EF tries to cross, the flash to CT to contest ticket booth position, and when they couldn't get it, Alexibi uses a Molotov to force EF out of it. When it came down to it, Na'Vi was actually in an advantageous position, but were unable to win key duels and thus lost the round. Now we look at an example with Na'Vi following the same protocols and everything goes right for them. This time against Team Spirit at the same tournament. The same A execute is caught by Spirit and Bit gets taken out from ticket booth. Wonderful breaks the smoke for JL and Ema, finding 3 kills as Spirit tries to cross. Knowing that the jungle smoke is broken, Alexi B has free space to run down CT and Wonderful gets himself into position to prepare for the flash. This time, as Na'Vi has the man advantage, JL joins up with Alexi B as CT, leaving Ema to hold connector and jungle alone, while 3 players take the duel in CT, ultimately winning the round, not having to use their smoke or Molotov in the process. From this perspective, you can tell that while Na'Vi has different ways to play the pistol round, they have a set protocol for whenever an A execute is caught, as they understand that it is a commonly used strategy, while Fluffy Gangsters are playing a little bit more reactive as a team. This is not to say that Fluffy Gangsters do not understand that it is a commonly used tactic, but more of a fact that they do not have a set protocol to maintain a consistent result against it. Na'Vi has more than likely used this same set of utilities countless of times during practice, thus understanding the timings, while a team like Fluffy Gangsters may not be able to consistently put themselves in a favorable position to win a round. I would also like to highlight the fact that Eternal Fire is most likely aware of Na'Vi's protocol to break the jungle smoke, and thus waited for the smoke to come back before they crossed the site on CT, while also keeping a lookout for the A side player. This is a result of anti-stratting that causes a very minor change in Eternal Fire's plans, but leads them to win the round in the end. To highlight my point about Tier 3 individuals focusing on weaponry over timing, in the second round of Fluffy Gangsters vs Suspects, after a very chaotic early round between the two teams, Fluffy Gangsters is left with a 2 vs 2 situation. Sobi hears a player underpass and knows that they will be going to B side. He initially jumps down to mid and tries to go for a fast rotate, but turns back to find a Mac 10 instead of trying to cut them off at B shot on a good timing with a USP. I don't think it's a wrong decision, but I'm certain a supportive tier 1 player will prioritize being ahead of the timing with a USP, not only because they are just as deadly with a USP, but more on the fact that he can apply pressure for his teammate with an AK to find openings created by him. Once again, I don't think it's a bad decision, and in fact, the way they played out the round was a good team play, but ultimately came up short. When it comes to buy round defaults and game plans, I find that Fluffy Gangsters and their opponents are not very different from the tier 1 teams. They understand the map control they want before they execute and enter a site, and when they get the space they want, they easily close out the rounds with really good team play. However, a big issue is that they often do not get the space to do so, or in doing so, leave gaps that they are not aware of. Rounds crawl to a halt when that happens. Sometimes, after a first engagement where one team loses out, they will fall back and try to reset the round, to play out a 4v5 or 3v5, as they don't really have a plan B or plan C. In this round between Fluffy Gangsters and Ruby, Fluffy Gangsters are in a 4 vs 5 situation after failing to go for a B split. They manage to catch the upper at stairs and decide to slow the round down. After a few seconds of silence, Highness tries to make a play on B as he heard the timing, but none of his teammates are in any position to play off of him. Even after getting the initial kill, his teammates are still unable to commit to the site, and in fact, split up at different timings trying to enter B, giving time for Ruby's players to pick off Fluffy Gangsters one by one. This is a round where essentially the team is unable to decide which side to commit to, and each individual player getting confused on their roles and what they need to do, leading to a very messy late round for Fluffy Gangsters. When I take a look at the tier 1 games with Na'Vi, getting space is much more efficient on both sides. They know the timings, when it's ideal for them to take control and when it's ideal for them to fall back, and when the first engagement takes place, the rest of the team springs into action, either forcing a trade, an opening, or space in the span of a few seconds, immediately pushing the game into the mid to late round. I think that this is because the teams are not only very familiar with the timings of the map, but also familiar with the opposing team due to anti-stratting. They know that after the first engagement, the opponent will know what their plan is. Thus, they would either have to reset the round or move quickly and catch the timings as soon as they can. In the 7th round of Na'Vi vs Vitality in IEM Cologne 2024, an initial skirmish happens on middle. With no space in middle for Vitality to take, they decide they have to take space somewhere else, so Zywo flashes Flamesy in A main to get space, but he gets caught off guard by JL. Apex then notices a player underpass and immediately tries to even the man advantage by getting a kill on Ima. From here, Vitality is able to read that Na'Vi is leaning towards an A execute, and thus stacking 3 players towards A. Na'Vi could also read the A stack coming from Vitality and decide to reset the round by retaking control of middle. However, a key difference in this reset is that they have already made the decision to end with an A split even after catching Mezzy at B shot. This is because even if Vitality would have more players on A side, the individuals on Na'Vi are already prepared to enter A side, both in terms of their position and their mentality. This gives them the least room for miscommunication and the ability to play off each other easily. Another core difference between these teams stems from the late round team play where they are either entering a site after a long default or playing the post plan. Tier 1 teams are usually very efficient in clearing the angles and using the utilities, while I see that Tier 3 teams sometimes forget about their grenades past the initial protocols, too often relying on aim dwarfs.
In the 7th round of Fluffy Gangsters vs Ruby, Fluffy Gangsters manages to find a suitable timing to commit to A side in a 4 vs 4 situation. Sobi gets a kill in connector, but Highness dies to an AWP in CT. In this case, Sobi is holding a key position, but knows that he needs to take more space for his team to enter the site safely. His teammates are in position to support him, either by throwing a flash or molotov into jungle for Sobi to take the space, but they don't. Instead, Sobi tries to take a duel against the jungle player alone and dies. Takanashi has to swing out white to kill the jungle player, but he is then forced to duel the connector player in a disadvantageous fight, only to lose, turning the round into a 1 vs 2 for Yata. This comes down to the lack of experience from the players, as they are in a high stress situation and the communication was most likely very chaotic to say the least. There are a couple of rounds like this even in the tier 1 scene, but the players are generally aware of what they need to do in these rounds. They understand their roles well enough to support their teammates in key positions, using utilities to clear out angles as optimally as possible. In round 4 of Na'Vi vs G2, after a 1-for-1 trade in middle, Na'Vi is left with 3 players mid and 1 player in A main. G2 reads the map and stacks 3 players on A side, and here we see the teamwork of Na'Vi playing out again. Firstly, Bit only enters jungle as Emo comes out of connector for them to crunch any players that might be in jungle. As they were doing so, Alexibi throws a molotov towards Triple to prevent any players trying to catch Emo off guard. Emo then throws a molotov under Palace and checks the site for any players. After that, he throws a flash towards CT for JL to come out of A main. JL, who is patiently waiting for his turn, only swings out of A main as the flash is going through. Getting the train on mounts and sandwich, he then baits out the upshot from Manasi to put himself in a safe position to molotov CT and force Hunter out of position. Bit gets the frag, and the round is basically theirs to win. Ultimately, after doing a short dive into the tier 3 scene, I was genuinely impressed by how coordinated and sharp these teams are. I've always known that they are far beyond the average skill level, but I genuinely feel that they are not too far off from the professional tier 1 teams. Now, there are a couple of clear differences between the tiers, especially when we come down to the efficiency and timings within the teams, but there is also a huge difference in the amount of organizational support that a tier 1 team gets. And so, I will really be looking forward to the progress of these tier 3 teams and players in the future. Thank you so much for watching the video. I know that I'm barely addressing the tip of the iceberg here and there is so much more that I want to cover, but I really want to try to make the video as short as possible while covering some of the major key pointers that I want to talk about. I've never really looked into the tier 3 scene before, but it has really opened up my eyes in a lot of things, and I do want to maybe cover some more videos about them in the future, maybe talk about storylines and key players or teams that might be upcoming, etc. But I'm just rambling here. Once again, thank you so much for watching the video, and hopefully I'll make another one again soon.